Awesome. As people are joining, feel free to leave a message, um, any comments, let us know, an emoji even, if you're in the room, so we know when to get started. Awesome. Where is everybody joining in from? We got any cool locations? Jason, where are you joining from?
I'm in Kansas City.
Nice. Nice, nice, nice. I'm in Manhattan if anybody else is there. Let's see. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to join. Send us a quick note if you're in the room. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, welcome to another episode of Christina's Compliance Corner. We're very excited to kick off 2023 with another episode of this fun, easygoing, very chill type of LinkedIn Live, where we are actually going to be talking about interesting topics and things that are relevant in the space. And for today's guest, I would like to introduce everybody to Jason Core. He just joined Laika, so we'll do a little introduction for him there and a warm welcome there. But also just want to make sure that he can give us a little background on his expertise and what he is going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about HITRUST, HIPAA, all things in the healthcare space, and he's the absolute perfect person to be talking about this. So we're really excited to get that going. And we'll feel free. This is definitely going to be a little bit of an info session. Jason's going to be the star of the show today, talking about all things. So would love to give Jason an opportunity to introduce himself. So Jason, tell us everything.
Everything, huh? Well,
Uh-huh.
Hi, Jason Core here, new to Laika, but certainly not new to HIPAA or HITRUST or a number of other frameworks. Started my career about a decade ago with a giant public accounting firm doing IT audits. And over the course of the years, I found myself with a kind of a passion and a specialty for some of the healthcare frameworks. Specifically, this newer part of the market that we're broadly referring to as digital health, or the kind of startups, the more innovative, tech-forward companies that are innovating the American healthcare system. So, relevant topics for companies in that segment obviously include HIPAA and HITRUST, and so that's kind of why I'm here.
How, just for the audience, would love to know, how you got into the HIPAA healthcare HITRUST space yourself. Was there something that kind of drew you to it, or what has kind of been your general experience interacting with some of those companies and, your experience on the ground?
Well, it was really market opportunity.
Yeah.
It was in 2018, the HITRUST market really picked up a lot of steam. It had existed for a decade before that, but not super widely adopted. And at that time, I was doing strategy engagements, cybersecurity strategy engagements for hospitals. And this new framework came out, and all of a sudden, like overnight, everybody had to comply with it. It was actually a decision by one of the big insurance plans that their whole supply chain was going to become compliant. And since I had the healthcare specialty and it was the new thing in the market and everybody was asking for it, we decided to start doing HITRUST. And
Nice.
all these years later.
Yeah. So just by a quick show of hands or comment in the chat, how many people here on this chat have actually heard of HITRUST before? And if you have heard of it, would love for you to kind of leave some of your, things, assumptions, myths, things that you've heard of in the space before, so that we can see if potentially Jason might be able to bring us some clarity or demystify some of this, for lack of better way of putting it. So let us know. Definitely one of the things I think HITRUST is definitely, from my experience in the field as well, is definitely a buzzword, for a better way of putting it. It's definitely one of those things. I hear it come up with customers. I hear it come up in sales calls, things like that. So, I guess, like, what even is HITRUST, Jason? Like, where does somebody even begin to conceptualize what this is? And maybe with that in mind, one of the questions that comes to us all the time is, what is the difference between HIPAA and HITRUST?
Sure. Well, they get conflated a lot because they're both security frameworks that are intended for healthcare organizations. But there are some marked differences between the
Yeah.
two. So I'll start with HIPAA. It's a federal regulation. It's the law. You have to do it.
You can't
Um,
get around that one.
can't get around that one. It's like, if you're crossing the street, you're supposed to do it at the crosswalk, or it's jaywalking. If you have health information, you're supposed to do HIPAA, or you're in violation of the Code of Federal Regulations. It's a law. We do it. HITRUST is something else. It's not regulatory in nature. They call themselves an assurance program, and it's totally voluntary. So if you want to participate in the HITRUST program, you can get in touch with HITRUST and get your copy of it's a proprietary framework, very comprehensive framework, and start to manage an information security program against the HITRUST framework. And if you choose to do that, you can go down this path, the assurance program, as I mentioned, whereby you have an auditor come evaluate, or an assessor evaluate, the state of your environment and submit it to HITRUST for hopefully a certification if the assessor's results are good.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, just from that exact answer, it sounds like there are some clear differentiators between the two of them, especially one of them being that you can't choose not to comply to HIPAA, versus, HITRUST is a way of kind of being able to actually show that certification with, like, maybe, you mentioned it's an assurance. So, more of like an actual report or auditing capacity in that way. So I guess one of the really great questions that we've already received, thank you so much, is, when is HITRUST versus HIPAA more applicable? I think that's one of the questions that some of our customers and prospects come to us all the time, especially since we've introduced this, since we offer both HIPAA and HITRUST. How do I know which one I'm supposed to be going for?
Right. Well, HIPAA is always applicable. Whether or not you want to go conduct a big audit, or you want to do that with your internal audit team or an external audit team, or you want to do a questionnaire-based lower level of assurance, that's fine. Evaluate your HIPAA compliance however you want, but you're still under, if you have signed a business associate agreement, or you collect health information, or you pay for healthcare at the insurance plans, you have to comply with HIPAA. When is HITRUST applicable? I'd say it's really for any organization that is trying to demonstrate a high level of commitment to their information security program. And there are a lot of reasons you'd want to do that. It might demonstrate to investors that you're taking your ethical obligations seriously. It might open up market share for companies that would have hesitations about sharing large amounts of health information. Or a series of other reasons you might participate.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like, I mean, not to double down further on kind of exactly what we were talking about or that you had mentioned before, but it really sounds like, a customer or a company that's looking to show compliance really, has to do HIPAA regardless. So they have to comply with the articles and regulations set forth by HIPAA. But if there's somebody more specifically looking for, like, a certification or an attestation or something of that nature, they kind of might have to go for HITRUST. So, are there instances where customers might be, or a company might decide to go for both?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just really common actually, and in fact, most of the customers that I've worked with, and hundreds over the years, who pursue a HITRUST certification, already have the HIPAA qualification. They've done some sort of an audit, and in large part because HITRUST is comprehensive of the HIPAA security rule.
Right.
And it's one of the really interesting things about the framework is it's built on all of these other frameworks. Whereas, NIST has some people sitting down talking about, what are the key areas of security and then building out controls, and ISO is doing the same thing. And the Congress did the same thing when they
Right.
wrote HIPAA, and the AICPA did the same thing with the SOC 2. HITRUST has its fundamentals in all these other frameworks. And so they looked around and they saw everything that was out there, took best of breed and put it into what we now call the HITRUST framework, or the HITRUST CSF.
Yeah. So that's a really great point. I think one of the things that is particularly interesting about HITRUST is that it kind of does grab from a couple different frameworks that have already been established, obviously proprietary information, things like that, the way that they go about their auditing, things like that. But it's an interesting fact because I think there are definitely a lot of prospects or customers that I've worked with myself that might actually think about going for HITRUST, either right at the beginning or of their compliance journey, or once they kind of reach a level of maturity. So they might go for some of their other certifications, whether it be SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, whatever it might be, and then add on HITRUST as they mature or gain some additional steam. Is that something that you would say is also um, a, true for what you've seen, at least in the space, or do you kind of see people going immediately for HITRUST?
Well, I'll say this is I think HITRUST has kind of picked up on that too. The R2, historically called the validated assessment. When we talked about HITRUST certification, this is what we were talking about for the
Right.
last 6 years. It's a very, very high bar.
Yeah.
Very comprehensive, really rigorous and detailed audit procedures. Every audit is third-party reviewed. The subject matter or the content stretches every area of information security, even deeper than I'd say most of the other frameworks. And it was really so comprehensive and rigorous that it could only be adopted by a large enterprise, like these giant spanning companies with 50 departments and 10,000 endpoints and 3 cloud hosted production environments. Like HITRUST was what was right for you. And what we found in the marketplace is that there's also a need for these high quality, high level of assurance reports and certifications, kind of down market, if you will, or with startups and middle-sized companies. And so HITRUST response was to come out with these new product offerings. About a year ago, they released the I1, which is a limited set of requirement statements and a reduced rigor with which the auditor has to evaluate those requirement statements. And then just recently, like in the last couple of months, they've released something called the E1, or Security Essentials 1 year. And it's even greater reduced. So if you're talking about what goes first, yeah, you might start with SOC, you might start with ISO. It depends on the market and your customers and what they want. But there is a path within the HITRUST program to start with the E, graduate to the I, graduate to the R.
So in thinking about that, and we don't need to dive too deep into like the nuances, just more of like the general understanding, which you've alluded to, that there's different levels of these certifications that within HITRUST that somebody might actually end up choosing to go for. But I think one of the questions that comes up a lot is like, who really is eligible for HITRUST? Like who might consider going for this, whether it's industry specific or investor specific or prospect specific, whatever it might be. But also kind of thinking about like, and it's difficult to, this one might be a little harder to quantify. So I apologize in advance, but essentially like, how to know which type of certification or level of attestation within HITRUST is actually going to be correct for somebody. So maybe if we can tackle some of those questions as well.
Yeah. So first off, anybody can do HITRUST. It must be scoped to an implemented system. So
Okay.
with my computer, sitting on my desk, I turn it into a server, and I get a couple of clients, and all of a sudden I have an implemented system. I can HITRUST certify that.
Right.
Now, it would have a ton of work because you got to go get your physical
Right.
facilities and all of these advanced security mechanisms, in endpoint protection and baselining. I got to put the thing behind, 2 man traps and whatnot. And so we won't do that, but I could. And so could any company with their system. Now the question of like, why would you do that? I say always start with what's the market asking for. If your customers aren't asking for HITRUST, you can go do it. Yeah, it's a best practice. Yeah, it's helpful. Yes, the subject matter and the content of the HITRUST CSF is very valuable for any company. It's probably not going to have the same return on investment as like if 90% of your customers are asking for SOC 2. Then you got to do SOC 2.
Yeah.
So which customers ask for HITRUST? That's the next question.
Yeah.
And it's largely insurance plans and health systems. They like it. It's a high level of assurance. It accounts specifically for some of the business associate requirements outlined by HIPAA. They like that it pays attention to the classification of PHI. Also, every audit that gets turned in is reviewed by a third party. Not just the audit team that's independent from you, the person doing HITRUST, but then
Right.
that audit team has an independent reviewer, and then they submit it to HITRUST, the organization that has an independent reviewer. So,
Right.
I mean, these are really high quality reports.
So that brings up such an awesome, just more industry wide question, not even HIPAA or HITRUST specific, but it's like it takes away that level of like subjectivity that could come, or differentiating ways of viewing an audit or performing an audit or things like that, or the controls that would be in scope for an audit, for example, for HITRUST. Is that a correct assumption there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you get a SOC 2, all of our customers and prospects here, like when you get a SOC 2 and you're like, is this company going to protect my data? There's a lot of things that you got to look at. Look at the first page and see if it's a reputable firm. If this is like a backwoods CPA, they aren't so worried about the liabilities. They might not be up to date on the latest security mechanisms. They might just be an accountant that's signing this thing on the side. Who knows? And then you got to go in and you've got to understand the way that they scoped it, and then the way that they define their controls, and they can make controls, whatever you want, as long as it addresses the trust service criteria reasonably, right? Not the case in HITRUST. You do the control as is prescribed by HITRUST. The other interesting thing is that in a SOC 2, the service auditor, the person doing the audit, can design their test procedure around the control.
Yeah.
HITRUST has prescribed or given us illustrative procedures, which every auditor does. And so we know that the audit procedure yields a higher quality conclusion because all of the auditors in the marketplace, be it giant public accounting firm or little startup in the backwoods, they're all doing the same audit procedure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's just like, it's one of the questions that comes up, and just like across industry for SOC 2, there's always questions about where your report is coming from for a SOC 2 and things like that. And, how is the auditor actually going through the process of testing this, and like with what standards, and, the flexibility and things like that. So I think that like, that's a really interesting component that essentially HITRUST provides really, really great guardrails of like basically very clear cut. This is how we're doing it. So I think that's really nice from an auditor perspective. I think that's really nice for the prospect. They know exactly, or the person going through it, they know exactly how they're going to be evaluated, and it needs to follow that specific set of criteria. So I think that's
no surprise. Like when you go, if you're trying to do HITRUST and you're going to go do your enterprise risk assessment, no reason to wing it. No reason to go like read and learn the NIST standard. No reason to make something up. Just look how the auditor is going to test it, and then build the risk assessment around it. They are comprehensive tests, but you know exactly how to pass and exactly what they're going to do, regardless of who performs the audit.
Exactly. Really interesting stuff, and definitely very applicable to some of the conversations that are going on at a wider relationship to just HITRUST. So Chris asked a really good question, and so did Jason. So we got a little question and answer session coming in from little break. So given the comprehensive nature of HITRUST, does it make maintaining compliance of other frameworks more efficient?
Well, my answer is yes.
I was going to say.
It's yes and no. It's yes and no. But at the end of the day, if you're doing the security control for one framework, you're doing this, and it maps right. You're doing the security control for all the frameworks, right? Like every single one of these frameworks is going to tell you to put a firewall in place before you can access the web server.
Yeah.
DMZ. Doesn't matter if it's PCI, HITRUST, or something else altogether. And so if you're doing the most comprehensive framework, you've already addressed a lot of the controls for the others. Now, one of the interesting things about HITRUST is we don't use what SOC calls a test of operational effectiveness. When you do a PCI test or a SOC 2 test, you kind of look at it and it's like, requirement passes, I'm doing a thumbs up, pass or fail, right? Yeah, like you're doing it or you're not doing it. And what I really like about HITRUST is that it's actually a maturity model. So if you're doing 75% of the control, you get 75 out of 100 points, right? Same with scope. You're supposed to do this all of the time. For every new hire, you need to approve access before you give it. Well, you forgot one out of the sample of 25, you're still 75% compliant.
Right. And that actually is like such a way of also thinking about like an organization that's growing and maybe doesn't have everything 100% figured out right at the get-go. It means that while HITRUST might be super comprehensive and it might be, take a little bit more time to make sure all your bases are covered, you do have an opportunity to grow into some of these controls and not immediately get dinged, for example. Which brings me to Jason's question, which is perfectly timed here. How quickly can an organization attain HITRUST? And then like what sort of ongoing requirement evidences must be met to maintain certification? So in thinking about exactly what you're talking about, Jason, 75% out of like 100, is that kind of that like ongoing requirements or all the controls included? Adding on to Jason's question.
Yeah, good question, Jason. A lot of times it depends on the organization. So I'll say this, like a Fortune 500 company with 20 offices, I mean, they're going to take the better part of a year just to do like basic access point controls because they got so many people all over the place. But one of the things that I love about Laika is that we really focus on kind of more innovative, fast-paced startups. And if I go tell a company with 100 people at it that you need to have, configure basic encryption on your access points, WPA2, it'll be done in like 20 minutes. And so without knowing exactly the complexity of the business, I can say some people take 30 days, 60 days. Big companies have tried for years and years to get a HITRUST certification and been unable to implement, the appropriate safeguards to go ahead with their external audit.
Yeah. And I think that definitely makes sense because there might be, and, we'll keep answering. There's some questions that are coming in, which are super awesome. Keep them coming. But I definitely think one of the myths that I came across when I was studying for my personal HITRUST certification before going through it was that only, to your original point, only these large enterprises could go for it because they were the only ones that had the manpower, that had everything designed and things like that. Whereas it kind of shows that there is a broader range for all of this. And that's, I think that's really important for, to your point that some of these smaller, maybe 100 or less fast-paced startups, this is super applicable to them too. And it's definitely achievable, which it's kind of a scary certification, or at least that's the myth around it, right? So with proper due diligence, I think it definitely makes sense. We got another really great question from Iva. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but can you compare HITRUST and ISO 27001? Sure. I know we talked about SOC 2, so this is a fun take on more of the global spectrum.
Yeah, well, I'll say this: I'm no lead auditor. I've done a couple of ISO engagements in my life, and I think two things that they have in common is they're both certifications. So once you get it, you're certified for a period going forward.
Yeah.
Opposite of like a SOC 2, which is once you get it, it's like an opinion on the year going backward. Just kind of nuance there. And then PCIs actually point in time, where I think it still is.
It is.
Now, the subject matter for ISO 27001 and HITRUST is really cool. I like kind of the risk management oriented nature of the frameworks. And so you read ISO, and kind of the core of what you do is you do this risk assessment every year, and you go identify your assets, understand, threats and vulnerabilities that apply to those assets. I identify like inherent and residual risk, and then you design safeguards around the riskiest areas of your business. Then you audit them and you redo your risk assessment, and a cycle that goes over and over and over again. And actually, the whole rest of the ISO framework, 27,000 one or two, is the appendix. It's saying if you're doing this risk assessment appropriately and you're taking a good, honest look at your business, you're going to be doing all of this stuff anyway. But then you can add more stuff in based on, your appetite for risk, or,
Right.
if there are material changes between risk assessments and all of these other things. And what I'll say is like, this is good risk management fundamentals. And it's the same thing that HITRUST is built on, is you're going to do a really good risk assessment. You're going to have a really good annual audit plan. And then based on the results of that risk assessment and management's risk tolerance, you can put safeguards in place that are appropriate based on, the inputs to that risk assessment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that thinking about it from more of like a risk-based approach, which is, at the end of the day, feels like it should be a cornerstone for like all compliance and security programs moving forward. It's really interesting to see how both of them can kind of coincide with each other. And it also, to one of the points that I want to like dive in on, which goes back to Jason Berman's original question around like what sort of ongoing requirements and timing and things like that, is to kind of really think about, you mentioned HITRUST, or that ISO being a certification is more over, you get certified and then it's an ongoing like sort of period of time. We know ISO obviously is, a 3-year certification, 2 years are surveillance, 1 is a deep dive. Can you talk a little bit more about like what the timing for certification is like for HITRUST? Is this something that's annual? What does year 2, year 5 look like, for example?
Yeah, sure. So the big boy, the R2, formerly the validated assessment, is a 2-year cycle. So the first year is a big audit, and your auditor might take 500, 700 hours to do this audit. Like it's a big deal. But the benefit of that is once you get through it, the off year is what's called an interim assessment. And they look at like 8, 12 requirement statements out of your hundreds and hundreds of requirement statements. So it's a really light touch. They just want to confirm that the scope hasn't changed. There hasn't been huge material findings that might impact what they found at the valid, or how they concluded at the validated assessment. They'll check in if you have any sort of, some people have these things called corrective action plans, where if you're like pretty close to being certified, but not quite there, they'll issue the certification. And then they'll say, you have to do this corrective action plan. Right. And, finish this by the time we come back next year, and you can maintain. So they'll check in on those. And then
kind of sounds like a non-conformity in ISO, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, kind of does. And then in the 3rd year, you're back to the big validated assessment, and that's kind of the R2, the highest tier HITRUST product. Then the I1 and the E1 are annual assessments. We come back every year. We test the same requirements every year. Now, HITRUST has released recently that they're looking at ways to reduce the auditor burden, the amount that we pay in fees to our assessors, the amount of work that the assessors do by sampling requirements year over year, as long as there's been no significant change. But we still don't have firm guidance on what that is or how it would shake out.
Yeah. And I think that definitely brings up one of the thinking about the auditor time, which is just like, if you're thinking, you mentioned like 500 to 700 hours for an auditor. I think one of the big myths, and maybe we can bust it really quick, for anybody who used to watch Mythbusters religiously like I did, a HITRUST audit is expensive. It's definitely an expensive endeavor. It's an expensive certification. And it's definitely something that I think is sometimes may be difficult for prospects, customers to swallow. But in hearing you just saying like 500 to 700 auditor hours, I think it's pretty easy, and not to mention everything else you talked about the level of in-depth and scrutiny and coverage and, kind of just this universal type of a framework. I think it's impossible not to think about, the fact that it would cost more than, for example, just like your run-of-the-mill SOC 2. Obviously depending on the purposes, but yes, it is 12:30, but we're going to go a little bit over, like we just mentioned. This is such a great conversation. I know there's a lot going on with HITRUST, different frameworks. It's definitely picking up speed in the space. So I want to make sure that while we get Jason's precious time here, we take full advantage. So any additional questions that you guys might have, feel free to ask in the comment section. We'll definitely get to it. I'm going to ask one last wrap-up question for Jason before we break, if there, so feel free to add questions as we'll get to them after this. But, I think the lingering overarching question that I also might kind of have is, is HITRUST really worth the hype? There's a lot of buzz around it. I kind of mentioned it's a buzzword. It's expensive. It's time intensive. But really kind of like, is it worth the hype? Uh-oh, Jason. There we go.
Yeah, I was on mute. Classic, right? I say yes, it is. But with this word of caution is we don't comply just to comply. We don't secure just to secure. You wouldn't buy a $15,000 room safe to keep your precious, earrings in, right? Like this is a high bar. This is the $15,000 safe. So go look at your market, figure out your target demographic. Who's your ideal client? What is going to generate revenue for your business? And ask them, what do you want? What do you look for? And if it's HITRUST, do HITRUST. It is a high bar. And it lends a lot of assurance to whoever it is that's demanding it and the rest of the marketplace and the investors and the other people in the company. It's also a really good signal that you're taking things seriously. If you're willing to do what is widely perceived to be one of the hardest frameworks with one of the most rigorous audit and assurance processes, it means you take it seriously.
Yeah, I think that's a really great note for us to end on, because I think that really, from everything that you've told us today and everything that we kind of already know a little bit about the space and, the direction that things are going in, just as a general trend for 2023, where security and privacy continue to be of utmost importance. I think that any questions around this definitely lend themselves to that, exact reaction, which it's definitely worth the hype. So awesome. I think we are good. If there are any additional questions, feel free to leave them. Any additional questions, of course, will get answered in the follow-up blog post, which will go up. And as always, this recording will be available after, so that if there are any questions or answers you need to reference at a later time, you can do so. And you can share with your internal networks, anything like that. So Jason, we so appreciate, especially myself, so appreciate you coming on. It was an awesome, awesome session, very informative. And, maybe it's lunchtime. So go make yourself one of those famous sandwiches. I know that you make quite well.
Shameless plug. Follow me on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
See y'all soon.
Man of many talents.
Bye now.
Awesome, guys. Bye.